Hi, my name is John Hutnick. I'm at TDT in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities, and I'm presenting to you today the model of co-research for the sociology classroom. Okay, so the challenge of this model is something that we've thought about as useful for teaching students, and it's to see the idea is to see students from the beginning as researchers. It's about developing inspiration for research and for the creation of knowledge, the search for knowledge, and the production of knowledge. And that we see the students as partners in this. So it's to inspire independent research. And the idea that everyone is a researcher is something that we think is important for future development, skill development, whether or not it be in employment or working in some agency or an NGO or a committee or in a court or something. The idea that each student can research a topic and present a report about this is a very important thing for, international competitiveness or leadership, or if you like those kind of words. We start where we are. We start in the classroom, and we start with what we have, and we are trying to inspire creativity and not fearing any case where that might break down or fail or something. There's not a way to fail, really. Creativity is something you look for and search for, and it doesn't have a tested level. Right? So we seek to see where we are now and the questions that come up when we start to ask critically about our situation in the world. The experiment for this model was that we used a class, Modernization and Social Change, where I was teaching readings from Capital and thinking about social change, and wanting to do this through a kind of mapping process. Thinking about mapping was important as well because it changes the orientation to knowledge production a little bit and raises questions about what is knowledge production. I mean, a map has a lot of information in, and of course a map has to be researched, just like an essay, but because it's a different way of presenting the material, it makes the students maybe think a little bit more about questions of presentation and not fall into formulas or the usual ways of doing things. So we started out by asking them to draw a map of Vietnam and to each draw that map and present what they thought was important about the map. So every student was making a map of Vietnam, and at the start of the class they were being very careful to get the border of the country correct, and every map seemed to be similar. But as the class went ahead, we started to put in, I asked them to put in, and they came up with ideas themselves, put in different things into the map that were important to them, like where they were born or where they had been, or important things that they thought it was important to convey to someone viewing the map about Vietnam. What were the significant sites and so on. And it was very interesting that by the end of the class we had 35 different maps of Vietnam. Not one correct map, but 35 interpretations. And that was the first lesson, I suppose. And then we were also looking at other maps, and we had some maps that were maybe provocative of thinking in a different way. For example, we looked at the history of maps, went back to Mesopotamia and the old Chinese maps and so on. Old European maps and Chinese maps used to, for example, have east at the top, rather than what's conventional now is to have north in the top of the map. So that's very interesting. Why did they have east in the top? Because east was the center of the world back then, like China or for Europe, the east, everything came from the east, right? The development of life for 2,000 years in Europe was east-oriented. The development to the north is more recent. It's interesting to talk about that. But then the idea of having things make you think differently is also a very important thing for research in general. The idea of research is really to ask a question: is it possible to think differently than we do now about this topic? Any topic, right? What is the possibility of thinking differently? This comes from Foucault, but it's a generally good point. To do this, we can use a map again, and in one experiment we did in the class, I showed a map which was of Asia, but all the names were removed of the countries, and all the identifying features except for the geographic outline of the countries were presented, but it was upside down. And I asked people to find out to show where they were in the map, and at first people could not identify where they were. And then, of course, the penny drops. They work out, one person works it out, and everyone sees that this is just an inverted map, and then it all makes sense. And then we can see that illustrated when one of the other teachers come into the class and see that process. It's very interesting to challenge the way in which people's expectations are. Their expectations of what research is, for example, as well. The idea that a student is there to simply learn what has already been found and taught. You know, the model of teaching that it like opens up the student's head and pours in knowledge, like making a cup of tea, is really not what we're about at TDT. We need to work together to become questioning, challenging thinkers. And so that's why everyone is a researcher from day one. In the second class, we asked the students to draw a map of the body. Now the body here is something to be mapped, that's a metaphor. And we talked a lot about metaphor and about ways of representing the body, modes of representation and pictures of the body. And we had different bodies. For example, we had the body of, the map of the body that shows all acupuncture points. And we had another one of Mao Zedong in his, Mao suit. And the underworld in China, it's from Michael Dutton's book, The Underworld in China, they've drawn a map of the different places where you can do pickpocket. You can different names for pickpocketing on Mao's body map. But the students were drawing their maps of themselves, and they were putting in what they thought was interesting, and it was the questions were coming from them. So it was largely about health and about fashion, and a lot about fashion, different kinds of identity presentation, different kinds of commodities that went into the look that people had, whether it be traditional or cultural or Western or modern or a subculture or something. It was very interesting to have that for discussion. And the maps of bodies were then also quite good fun, because we could illustrate and populate the maps with people we knew or liked or disliked. The next class was one where we brought in some of the readings that we've been looking at around labour and value, labour theory of value and work, unemployment, employment, informal and formal economy. And the challenge then was to draw a map that showed the different ways in which labour had made it possible for the students to come to work that day, come to class that day. So some of them, for example, living in student accommodation in Kituksa, what is the labour that produces that possibility of coming to class? The people that make the breakfast, the people that run the building, the people that built the building, the caretakers, the cleaners, the administrative staff, all of these kind of workers that are working to make it possible for someone to just wake up in the morning and walk down the stairs or down the lift. The lift has to be repaired, for example, and come to class. Coming across the campus means a whole lot of different kinds of work has gone on. The beautification of the campus, the cleaners, the architects and the builders of the buildings, and all of these are labour that makes it possible for students to come to the classroom. The classroom itself it's got a whole lot of labour behind it, labour that makes it possible for the classroom to exist, for the electricity to come, the lights to be on, and so on. The timetabling, the security guard, all of this. And of course the students themselves are products of labour because they've been brought up and socialised in society by their parents, the labour of giving birth and the labour of looking after children and teaching them to walk and to talk and to be students. So how to map all of these things? Maybe there's too many things for one map, so we have to make decisions about what we're going to include. And of course, there's also an aesthetic dimension to that. Our discussions became very interesting around all these things. What is it that people wanted to produce when they produced knowledge about, for example, formal and informal economy, or the labour of socialisation? All this, of course, was leading up to the final assessment, which was a more difficult and experimental challenge, and we didn't really know whether there was an answer for this. The idea was to show social change on a map. Now, it's a little bit easier, perhaps, to write an essay about social change because in narrative you can unfold the story. But in a map, everything is there at the same time. So how do you show social change? And that was a good challenge for the students. And they were thinking about the development of technology, the development of labour, the development of community, the development of, everything from their villages through to the development of transport around Ho Chi Minh City. Different topics that had to be researched, but then there was also the problem of presentation. So how you communicate this material. And we got some fantastic results, which we, I hope, can now have a look at when we move from here, me talking, and that's a bit boring, right, to the classroom and see some of the work. Okay, so thank you for watching this presentation of the model from Social Sciences and Humanities of co-research for the sociology classroom. We've hoped that through this model we can show how we care about the students' capacity for inquiry and enhancing that through participatory exercise and the experience of being researchers themselves. We think they are always researchers when they write essays, but in this case they were making maps. That was to make them reflect on what is at stake in the process and think about it in a different way. I mean, we want to be able to teach our students to do more in terms of research than look things up on Google, which everyone can do now, but to really think deeply and critically into the ways in which knowledge is produced. And this video was about that. So we thank you for watching the video. We hope we can explain more about what is the model of co-research through some of the documents we attach, and we have like a bibliography and some footnotes available if anyone is interested. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the producers who have made this video. Bye.